December 1st, 1994, 9:30 in the morning. Manhattan Criminal Court. Every reporter in New York City had their cameras aimed at the courthouse entrance, waiting for Tupac Shakur to arrive for the verdict in his sexual assault trial. They expected to see the cocky rapper who'd been taunting them for weeks. What they got instead made every single person in that building go silent. Tupac rolled through the door in a wheelchair, his head wrapped in bandages, his arm in a sling, and bullet wounds visible through his shirt. He'd been shot 5 times less than 12 hours ago. The doctors had begged him not to leave the hospital. But Tupac came anyway. And what he said when he saw the cameras would start a war that would eventually kill him and his former best friend. But to understand why Tupac showed up to court looking like he'd been through a war, you need to go back 24 hours. Back to the phone call that would change hip-hop forever. November 30th, 1994, 10:15 in the evening. Tupac was in Harlem at Ron G's apartment, laying down verses for a mixtape. His beeper kept going off. Same number, over and over. $7,000. That's what the message said. Come to Quad Studios in Times Square tonight, record 1 verse for Little Sean, get paid $7,000 cash. Tupac needed the money. His legal bills from the trial were destroying him financially. $7,000 for 1 verse, maybe 30 minutes of work. It seemed too good to pass up, but something felt off. I don't know about this, Tupac told Stretch, his friend from Live Squad who was with him. This feels weird. It's just a verse, Stretch said. We'll go, you'll rap, we'll get paid, we'll leave. Tupac's instinct was screaming at him. But $7,000 for 1 verse. He made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. He said yes. They arrived at Quad Studios just after 11 at night. The building on 7th Avenue in Times Square was familiar territory. Tupac had recorded there dozens of times. Tonight felt different, though. The lobby was too quiet. The usual buzz of activity wasn't there. As they approached the elevator, Tupac heard something that made him relax. A voice from above, shouting down through the stairwell. It was Lil Cease, part of Biggie's Junior M.A.F.I.A. crew. Biggie Smalls, Tupac's friend, was recording upstairs. That's why they'd called him here. Biggie was in the building. Yo, Pac! Cease's voice echoed down. Tupac looked up and waved. If Biggie's people were here, he was safe. These were his friends. His paranoia dissolved. He pressed the elevator button and turned his back to the entrance. That's when he heard the sound. The door behind him opening. He started to turn, started to see who was coming in. 3 men in army fatigues, guns already drawn. And in the split second before everything went to hell, Tupac realized he'd been set up. Don't move, one of them said. But Tupac Shakur had never followed orders in his life. He wasn't about to start now. Fuck you, Tupac said, and reached for the first gun he saw. The decision to fight back instead of comply would save his life and nearly end it at the same time. He grabbed the gunman's weapon. They struggled. The gun went off. And suddenly Tupac was feeling impacts, feeling bullets entering his body, feeling his legs give out beneath him. 2 shots to the head. 2 to the groin. 1 through his hand. 5 bullets total. $40,000 worth of jewelry ripped from his neck and wrists. And through it all, through the pain and the shock and the certainty that he was dying, Tupac had one thought. Biggie knew. Biggie was upstairs. Biggie's people had called him down. Biggie had set him up. Stretch dragged Tupac into the elevator as the gunman ran. Blood everywhere. Tupac barely conscious. The elevator doors closed and started rising toward the 8th floor where the studio was, where Biggie was, where Puffy Combs was, where everyone who just tried to kill him was waiting. What happened when those elevator doors opened would become one of the most disputed moments in hip-hop history. But what nobody disputes is Tupac's reaction when he saw his supposed friends. The elevator opened. Tupac, bleeding from 5 bullet wounds, looked up to see Puffy Combs, Biggie Smalls, Andre Harrell, and several other Bad Boy Records affiliates standing there. And according to Tupac, not one of them looked surprised. Not one of them rushed to help. Not one of them called for an ambulance. They looked at me like they knew it was going to happen. Tupac would later tell Vibe magazine. Nobody would look me in my eyes. Puffy, according to Tupac's account, stood there frozen. Biggie, the man Tupac had called his brother, the man whose career Tupac had helped launch, wouldn't meet his eyes. Harrell, who'd been taking Tupac to dinner just days before, suddenly seemed very interested in his shoes. "You all knew," Tupac said through the blood and pain. "You all fucking knew." The details of what happened next get fuzzy because Tupac was going into shock. But somehow he made it out of that building. Somehow he ended up at Bellevue Hospital. And somehow, despite having 5 bullets in his body, despite losing massive amounts of blood, despite doctors telling him he might never walk again, Tupac checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice less than 3 hours after surgery. He went to the actress Jasmine Guy's house to hide and recover. And the next morning, wrapped in bandages and sitting in a wheelchair, he showed up to court to hear the verdict in his sexual assault case. The jury convicted him on some charges. Tupac barely reacted. He had bigger problems now. What the media didn't understand, what nobody understood yet, was that something had broken inside Tupac that night at Quad Studios. Not just his body, which would heal, but his belief in people, in friendship, in the hip-hop community he'd helped build. He'd been shot 5 times, and the people he trusted most had watched it happen, or worse, they'd planned it. "I was hurt more by them not doing nothing than by the actual bullets," Tupac later said. "Bullets, I can understand. That's the street. But your friends watching you bleed? That's betrayal." The war started immediately. Not with guns, not yet, but with words. In an interview with Vibe magazine in April 1995, Tupac laid out exactly what he believed happened that night. He accused Puffy, Biggie, Harrell, and their entire circle of having prior knowledge of the setup. He couldn't prove it, but he felt it in his bones. Biggie and Puffy denied everything. They claimed they were in the studio, had no idea what was happening in the lobby, and were just as shocked as everyone else. But the damage was done. Tupac didn't believe them. And more importantly, his fans didn't believe them. The shooting at Quad Studios created a rift in hip-hop that would never heal. What had been a friendly competition between East Coast and West Coast rap suddenly became something darker. It became personal. It became about loyalty and betrayal. It became about who stood where when Tupac was bleeding on the floor. Here's what makes the Quad Studios shooting even more complicated. We now know who likely pulled the trigger, and it wasn't Biggie. It probably wasn't even ordered by Biggie. Years later, through court documents and confessions, a different picture emerged. Walter King Tut Johnson, Jock Haitian Jack Agnant, and possibly Jimmy Henchman were the names that kept coming up. Street guys, not rap guys. People who had their own reasons for wanting Tupac robbed or hurt or scared. Tupac himself mentioned these names. He knew who shot him. But he also believed Biggie knew it was going to happen. He believed his friend had sacrificed him for some reason he couldn't understand. Even if Big didn't pull the trigger, he knew, Tupac said in an interview. "How you in the building and don't know? How your man cease calling me up from the same spot I'm about to get shot at? That ain't coincidence." Whether Biggie actually knew remains one of hip-hop's greatest mysteries. Biggie maintained until his death that he had nothing to do with it, that he didn't know, that he wouldn't have let it happen. Many people who were close to both men believed Biggie was telling the truth, but Tupac went to his grave believing otherwise. The paranoia from that night transformed Tupac. The man who showed up to court in a wheelchair was different from the man who walked into Quad Studios the night before. He was harder, more aggressive, more willing to see enemies everywhere. The famous thug life philosophy that had been about systemic oppression now became personal. It became about survival in a world where even your friends might be trying to kill you. When Suge Knight bailed Tupac out of prison in October 1995 for $1.4 million, Tupac didn't just sign with Death Row Records, he signed up for war. West Coast versus East Coast. Death Row versus Bad Boy. Tupac versus Biggie. The battle lines had been drawn at Quad Studios, and now it was time to fight. The diss tracks started flying. Biggie released "Who Shot You?", which he claimed wasn't about Tupac, but the timing was suspicious. It came out just months after the shooting. The lyrics talked about robbery and violence. To Tupac, it was a taunt, a reminder of the night he'd been betrayed. Tupac's response was nuclear. Hit 'Em Up might be the most vicious diss track in hip-hop history. He didn't just attack Biggie's music. He claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans. He threatened violence. He mocked Biggie's weight, his success, his entire existence. And through it all, the rage from that night at Quad Studios poured out. That's why I fucked your bitch, you fat motherfucker, Tupac rapped. Words designed to hurt. Words designed to make Biggie feel the way Tupac had felt watching his friend stand there while he bled. The East Coast responded, not just Biggie but other rappers too. What had been Tupac's personal beef became a coastal war. Fans chose sides. Radio stations chose sides. The entire hip-hop community fractured down the middle. And through it all, Tupac kept coming back to that night. November 30th, 1994. The night he was shot 5 times and his friend did nothing. Everything that came after, all the violence and hatred, and eventually death, traced back to those few minutes in the Quad Studios lobby. I'm going to die for this, Tupac said in an interview in 1996. I know that. This war we're in, somebody's going to die. But I can't let it go. They tried to kill me and then pretended like they didn't know. How do you forgive that? He couldn't, and he didn't. September 7th, 1996. Las Vegas. Tupac was shot again. This time fatally in a drive-by shooting after a Mike Tyson fight. 4 bullets. 6 days later, he was dead at 25 years old. The official investigation pointed toward Orlando Anderson and Compton Crips retaliation. But many people, including Tupac's family, believe the real conspiracy goes deeper. Back to New York, back to Bad Boy, back to Quad Studios. 6 months after Tupac died, Biggie was shot and killed in Los Angeles. Another drive-by, another unsolved murder. The war that started at Quad Studios had claimed both of its main characters. Looking back now, 30 years later, the Quad Studios shooting stands as hip-hop's greatest tragedy. Not because of the bullets, though those were real, but because of what those bullets destroyed, a friendship, a community. The idea that hip-hop could stay above the violence that surrounded it. Walter King Tut Johnson was released from prison in 2024 after serving 27 years for other crimes. He's never been charged with shooting Tupac. Jacques Haitian Jack was deported. Jimmy Henchman is in prison for other murders. The actual triggerman might never face justice for what happened that night. But the consequences of Quad Studios echo forever. Every East Coast versus West Coast debate. Every rap beef that turns violent. Every time a rapper's paranoia seems justified because they remember what happened to Tupac, it all goes back to that lobby, to those 5 bullets, to the moment when Tupac looked up and saw his friends doing nothing. The hate you give little infants fucks everybody. That's what Tupac's stomach tattoo said. The hate the streets gave him that night at Quad Studios fucked everybody. It fucked Tupac, who spent his last 2 years in rage and paranoia. It fucked Biggie, who died defending himself from accusations he may not have deserved. It fucked hip-hop, which lost 2 of its brightest stars. And it fucked all of us, because we'll never know what music they would have made if they'd lived to see 30. The wheelchair, the bandages, the conviction to show up to court less than 12 hours after being shot 5 times. That image of Tupac is iconic because it shows his character. His refusal to be broken, his determination to keep fighting no matter what, but it also shows the beginning of the end. The moment when the war became inevitable. Quad Studios closed years ago. The building still stands on 7th Avenue. Tourists walk past it every day not knowing that the spot where they re-standing is where hip-hop's bloodiest chapter began. Where 5 bullets changed everything. Where a friendship died and the war was born. And somewhere, in all the theories and conspiracies and unanswered questions, the truth about that night remains buried. Did Biggie know? Was it just a robbery gone wrong? Was there a deeper conspiracy we may never know? The people who could tell us are mostly dead or in prison or silent. What we do know is this. November 30th, 1994 at Quad Studios, Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times. He survived. But the man who walked into that building and the man who rolled out in a wheelchair were not the same person. One believed in friendship and hip-hop unity. The other believed only in survival and revenge. And 22 months later, that second man was dead. Killed in another shooting. Another mystery. Another tragedy. The hate they gave him that night fucked everybody. Just like he always said it would.